All right. Gracie, did you want to wait a few more minutes or did you want to go ahead and get started?
I had muted myself there. Yes, I'm happy to get started, and I can give a bit of an intro so people, as they trickle in as well.
Sure, absolutely. So I'll go ahead and start with the library slides here. Let's see. All right, so everyone will be muted for most of the webinar. Gracie and I just talked, and I know she wants it to be more interactive, so we will be stopping at certain points throughout the webinar to kind of get your feedback and different information there. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask them through the Q&A icon at the bottom of the Zoom window. It looks like this guy. So we will be definitely taking questions at the end. Not all questions will be answered. I know the last time we did this, we got quite a few, but we will try to get to as many as we can. The presenter will not provide the slides because there is no slide deck for this presentation, but the webinar will be recorded and be available on Arlington Library's website. And welcome. This is a presentation of educational means on self-care. It does not provide personalized medical advice, and the Arlington Public Library uses subject matter experts from a variety of sources to provide educational public programs. We do not endorse, suggest, or recommend a specific company, product, or service. And now that we have that out of the way, I will go ahead and let Gracie introduce themselves.
Thanks, Britt. It's great to be here. Thank you, everybody, for taking some time out of your evening to talk about self-care. It's my favorite conversation. It really never gets old for me. I always learn something new whenever I present and hear your questions. So that's why I really want to encourage you to ask questions throughout this workshop, because the more that I hear what's working for you and what's interesting, where you feel still confused, the more that we'll be able to tailor this to like your actual self-care needs. Before we jump in, I just want to thank Arlington Public Libraries and Britt for being inviting me. I think this is my fourth time presenting with you all over the past 4 or 5 years, and it's always a great crowd of people. I appreciate you all having me and your interest in the self-care conversation as well. So the title tonight was pretty vague. It was self-care for the new year 2021. And I was sitting and thinking about how do we focus this so it's as helpful as possible. And what I really want to be clear in is that I'm not perfect at self-care. I have no expectation that anyone on here should feel like they're great at self-care. I believe in like a willingness to know about self-care is like the path itself, which I'll get into more information about. But I want this to be just very real, because I think we've all had a tough year. Even if you haven't gone through the worst losses of anyone you know, I'm sure that you've really had to struggle in certain moments this year. And I want this to feel like not one more thing that's not going well, because I think that self-care is really the antidote to that. That self-care is the thing that can meet us where we're at and really help us understand how we can move forward and as our whole selves. And so when I usually teach about self-care, I kind of start with methodology and then I go into context as it goes later on. And I've decided tonight I want to flip the situation on its head. And I really want to talk a little bit more about context in the beginning. And then we'll get more towards the end about methodology of how we actually do this for ourselves and how we start to create a self-care practice that we feel like, yeah, I'm doing it. And so we'll get to that later. And then I want to spend some time at the end of the conversation talking about the connections between social justice and self-care, because I've found that that you can't have one without the other, and that learning how to care for the self is really the pathway of learning how to care for and hold space for others who need support. And to change the bigger cultural context as well. And so we're going to get into that at the end. So I hope everyone stays around for that part. So I want to start by telling my story of how I am come to sit here on a Thursday evening and talk about my views on self-care. And I want to tell the story because I've done a lot of workshops. I've been teaching people about self-care for over 5 years now, and I've done a lot of workshops, and I can kind of go really easily into my story about like self-care. And so I'm going to just slow down and really be present to say that like I grew up in a family where self-care was just not modeled for me. It was something that I think people felt really bad about doing for themselves, that somehow self-care was selfish. And I grew up in a family that I've come to recognize had a lot of codependence in it. And codependence, I don't think there's an easy definition for it, but basically it's the idea that like, if you're okay, then I'm okay. And if you're not okay, then I'm not okay. And some things that organize around codependence are mental illness, addiction issues like alcoholism, that when you grow up with someone who is not well in some way, and especially if that person is your caregiver, it can create a relationship where we don't even get to know, someone who is in relationship with that person doesn't even get to know about themselves. So as I was growing up, I don't think I had a huge opportunity to really get to know much about myself. I think it became very much around trying to keep the peace in my family, trying to make sure everyone was okay, trying to make sure no one got too angry. So I wouldn't feel threatened in a way. And so I became very much a people pleaser, of feeling like if I just made everyone else happy, if I just worked really hard, I was like straight A student and just like put my whole self into trying to accomplish as much as I possibly could. And so I felt like if I just worked really hard, then somehow I'd be okay. And as I got older, I had a lot on the surface going for me. Like I made good grades. I went to a college to study journalism. I was really, had a clean room. My clothes matched. Like I was okay in some ways. But on the inside, I felt really lost, and I felt like I didn't know myself. And I looked around at other people in my life, and I saw that they were doing this thing for themselves that it just seemed like it made everything go better for them. And I wasn't really able to put a name on it. And now I look back, I'm like, oh, they were taking care of themselves. Like they were setting boundaries and saying like, no, I'm not going to do that. They were being honest about how they really felt in situations. They were taking breaks and resting. They were like not totally beating up on themselves every time they made a mistake about something. They were having fun. They had hobbies. They, were able to really be vulnerable and show aspects of themselves that I was like horrified. Like, why wouldn't you just keep that hidden? And I saw that these people, instead of like suffering horribly in their life, that they were actually like having a really good time and things were going well for them. And yet I still wasn't really able to find that for myself. I tried to look for like a validation of who I was in a lot of different things, a lot in relationships. If I could just find the perfect person or perfect boyfriend, then I would be okay. And if I were made all the grades and got all the praise from the people around me, I would be okay. And then also just taking comfort. I took a lot of comfort in food and eating, and felt very like conflicted about how my body looked, and got into a cycle of wanting to diet and lose weight all the time. And I think looking back now, I'm like, I was just really searching for myself. And when I was in college, I studied abroad for a year, and I took my first yoga series. And I walked into this, it was like a funny little room in the college like rec center in Scotland. And I remember the carpet was really kind of gross, and it was just this older woman who was teaching the class. And I remember just getting on my mat, and I had this feeling that was very strong of like, this is it. Like this is what feels different. Like this is a place you can really take care of yourself. And I followed that path. I practiced yoga for a long time. I became a yoga teacher. I became a really successful yoga teacher. I taught full time for over 5 years. I started leading retreats in different countries. Really got a community of people that are wanting to know about themselves. And I just felt like I'm getting warmer. I didn't know what it was that I was going for, but I'm like, I'm really getting warmer here. At that point in my life, I was living with somebody, and we were in a pretty committed relationship. We had gotten a dog together. I remember that was like the thing. We got the dog. I was pretty sure I was going to marry this person. And it was at that point that I decided I was going to like really invest in my self-care. And I knew what I was calling it at that point. I was like, this is self-care. This is powerful. I need to do this for myself. And so I signed up for this immersion in this practice called Ayurveda. And for those of you who don't know Ayurveda, it's the sister science to yoga. So it's a more than 5,000-year-old science of how to care for yourself, and that There's a lot in Ayurveda. Obviously, it's very complex, and really about who you are as a person, getting to know yourself, getting to know the care that you need, and linking your whole self up into nature, because the main teaching of Ayurveda is that we are not separate from nature, but rather we're part of nature, and so we need to be in rhythm with nature. And the more that I like had practiced little bits of Ayurveda, I felt the power of it, and I knew that I wanted to get in it. And so I signed up for this like really expensive 9-month long immersion. I was like, I'm going to learn this. And it was at that point that the person that I thought I was going to marry pretty much looked at me and said, I don't think this is going to work. And I looked right back at him and I said, I don't think it's going to work either. And we got out right before that point, where it would have probably taken a lot more to get out of it. And all I knew how to do was practice self-care at that point. That I had invested in this program, and I known that I'd fallen apart so badly in relationships before. When a codependent breaks up with somebody, or someone is broken up with, it does not go very well. If you have invested your whole sense of self in another person, that person does not last. It leads to like kind of a gross, ugly fallout. And somehow, when we broke up, I was okay. I would wake up in the morning. I would do my practices of self-care. I would go to bed early at night, because that's a really big part of Ayurveda, is that you go to bed sometime after the sun sets. I shoot for about 10 p.m. And I found that not only was I not falling apart, but I was actually felt like I was getting stronger. And I was really accessing something in myself that I didn't even quite know was possible was there. And that was just a sense of self, and a sense that I was okay, and a sense that I could trust myself, and a sense that my giving to myself and taking time to get to know who I was not a selfish thing. It didn't hurt anybody. And I started to realize that. And it was right at that point that I found out that my father had cancer. And he'd had a lot of medical issues over the past year. His health wasn't great in some ways, but they found out that he had a form of leukemia. He got into a treatment program at Johns Hopkins. And I sort of thought, this is, he's going to go through this. All the doctors thought that the chemotherapy would work really well. And I like kind of didn't take it super seriously. I would go visit him. He was in kind of like a quarantine situation there. And then as things started to go on, like things did not go well in a lot of ways. And I had to go to the hospital a lot more. I had to be with him in this situation that I started to realize he was dying. And I'd never been in that situation before. And it was that thing that if I had imagined it before, I would have been like, I would totally fall apart. I won't be able to be strong. I can't do this. And yet I would do my self-care practices, and I would drive to Johns Hopkins from Washington, D.C. It's about an hour-long drive. And I would go be with him, and I would, it felt just like a really hard situation, but also it was filled with grace in a way that's hard to even describe. And I really, really felt the power in that moment that practicing the self-care that I was practicing, it was not only was it not selfish, but that it was helping him, that he needed to see me be okay. He needed to know that I could be okay on my own. And one of the, after he had passed away, because he did end up passing away after about 8 months in treatment, one of his friends was talking to me, and he said, she said that he was talking about my brother and was kind of giving her advice about how to help my brother. And then she asked about me, and he goes, Gracie takes care of herself. It's okay. And I felt what the gift of that is that I think we all think we have to sacrifice ourselves because we're going to save somebody else. And even the people out there, we think we're going to sacrifice ourselves so we can like save the world. And while a lot of those intentions are really positive, amazing things, I think that if we are not tending to ourselves, getting to know ourselves, and really learning what we're here to do, and how we want to share ourselves with the world, that people are not going to feel at ease around us. People are not going to be inspired by us. People are not going to want to change their lives when they see what we're doing. I think of every person in my life that I've met who is focused on self-care, and really, again, like those people I looked at to be like, what are they doing that is so different than me? Because it feels really different. And like they were teaching me with their self-care. And so what I've started to recognize is that we teach each other with our self-care. We teach each other by setting boundaries around each other to say, no, I can't do that. And then we say like, oh, that person just said no, and it didn't totally end me. I can handle it. And like, maybe I'm allowed to say no next time in this. That person is like, eating food that looks really like healthy and delicious. And maybe I'm allowed to just like cook for myself that way. So if some of you out there, maybe that you got like the family that you grew up in that had the really great self-care that was modeled, and you feel like you've never had to struggle on any level of like physical, mental, emotional, then maybe this workshop is not for you. But if you're anything like me, you've been on a journey in your life, and you want to know more. And so I had like a little subtitle on my list of notes here that said this workshop is self-care for people who aren't good at practicing self-care. Or self-care for people who think they're not good at practicing it, or who have a deep hunger to learn more. And that's the place I wanted me to send tonight, is that if we feel a glimmer of what it is to take care of ourselves, or the power of moments of our life where we have focused really deeply on ourselves and how that actually was like maybe one of the best times of our lives. This is about reorienting and going deeper into that place to start to understand. So I'm just going to read a little comment from Heather. I'm exactly like you. I'm amazed at how well you could articulate all of this. Thank you for being so open. Of course. Yes, my pleasure. I have learned from teachers who are willing to be open about the hard stuff of life. I think otherwise, if we're not open about that, then we all just assume everyone else has it totally figured out. And just, I'm going to get into some material here, but just the context of what's happened in my house this evening or over the past week is that my husband has found out he has a slip disc in his back. And so we're full-time quarantining with a 3.5-year-old and our 11-month-old. We have been since she was born in February, pretty much when the pandemic started. And my husband now is like pretty much out of commission. So this is me doing like full-time childcare and working somehow at the same time. And so just to say that like, I don't have this totally pretty self-care context that I'm practicing right now. Like I feel like I'm really practicing in some of the trenches of life. And I want to meet you all in that place, that you don't have to have your life figured out to a certain point in order to start practicing self-care. Self-care is like something that's radical, that we do it in the moment, however we are. And so that's going to bring me into my my first point. So I'm going to give my first point. I have 3 here, and then I'm going to pause after the first one and just see if anyone has any questions or comments that they want to add. But feel free to just pop them in the chat box too, and I'll read them after I'm finished with this first one here. And so these are 3 shifts that I think might be helpful if you want to practice a more sustainable, generative version of self-care this year. And the first one, it's a shift that you're going to have to make, that self-care isn't a to-do list item. And that's totally what I would have told you before in life. Like I loved reading like teen magazine when I was younger, and they had like checklists in there. And I had like a whole dream that I could just like checklist my whole life away and I would just be done. And that's not what self-care is. There are elements of like, things that we know that we need to do for ourselves. You might know that you just like function super well with exercise. And when you're not exercising, like it's just harder for you to connect to yourself. You might know that meditation is just like a non-negotiable practice, that eating sugar makes you feel this way, that drinking alcohol makes you feel this way. And you start to create an awareness of who you are. And so but that's not a to-do list item. I think we get the idea of self-care as a to-do list item because we live in this culture that is extraordinarily focused on commodification and productivity, that we're here in a lot of ways, we're told to be like the most productive, awesome version of who we are. And while I love a culture that like has space to follow your desire and strive and become more, I think those are beautiful parts of our culture. I think we really fall apart as human beings when we think that we are only as good as what we've gotten done that day. When we think that if we make a mistake that somehow we're defective, and if we think that like our self-care could be compartmentalized to just like one aspect of our being. One of the metaphors I like to use is that a lot of people I talk to are very overwhelmed in their lives, and I talk to them about self-care, and I can see in their eyes, they're like, I'm doing so much already and I'm so tired, and you're asking me to do more. And I can feel what they're probably thinking is like, my boat is like sinking and you're asking me to put more stuff in my boat. And what I've really come to understand that I'm asking us all to do is to recognize that self-care is the boat. And that if you're sinking, you need to take some time to look at why. And so self-care, it's not a to-do list item, and that like you have to get it done. And self-care is your ability to look at who you are and how you're operating in your life right now, and to look at like what is weighing you down, like what relationships, what habits, what relationships to like work and substances in your life, like when you bring them into your boat, how do you feel it's going? And then also like what uplifts you, like what communities uplift you, what works of art uplift you, what food uplifts you, what relationship with nature uplifts you, what practices uplift you. And so I can tell that people think about self-care as a to-do list item when they say that they're bad at self-care. And people say that a lot to me. I think they're like, you're a self-care person, like you're gonna help me with that. Okay, I'm bad at it, like I need help. I hear that, and it's kind of a joke, but I feel like if so many people give me the same joke, I think it's really revealing a deeper truth that's underneath it. That I think people think that they're somehow defective because they haven't been able to like figure out the perfect self-care. I'm going to talk a little bit later, and that's point number 3 about perfection and how much that actually has to be taken out of self-care in order for it to work. But I think that to really stop and look at that, like, how do you treat yourself? Do you treat yourself like you need to be the best at everything? Do you treat your self-care like you're good at bad at it? And even when you take that inventory for yourself, I'm going to encourage you not to say like, I'm bad at self-care because I say that I'm bad at self-care. It's kind of like doubling down on our perfectionism, but rather just to start to understand that self-care, it's a way of understanding yourself. It's a way of getting to know yourself. If you think about a friend in your life, and if you were to be like, okay, checklist, like, what have you done today? And they're like, oh, I did this, but I kind of had a hard moment, and like I got a flat tire, and then I like forgot to pay this bill. And you're like, oh, no, I'm like not going to be nice to you. Like, let's talk tomorrow after the checklist is done. Like, you would not want to be friends with a person like that. You would not have any friends if you treated somebody like that. And yet I think a lot of us measure ourselves that way, that like, how good have I been? And therefore, like, how nice am I allowed to be? And so I'll say one more thing about this, and then I'll leave a little space for Q&A. But I think that the more and more I practice self-care, I realize it does require some action items, and that's really important. But really, it's more of a way that we relate to ourselves and to the world. And a lot of it is based in gentleness and kindness and honoring the way that we would treat like our children or our pets, or anything that you love in this world. I think bringing up the concept of self-love is kind of a big concept, and it can bring up a lot for all of us. So I like to sort of center in self-like. Like, what would it be like to just like myself and to treat myself like I could just be like, oh yeah, you had a bad day. Like, you're just try again tomorrow, like the way you would with a friend. So I'm going to pause there and just see if anyone has any comments or questions at this point. I'm going to take a sip of my tea too. And you can just chat them in the chat box or put them in the Q&A as well. Okay, I'm not getting anything right now, and I'm just going to encourage everybody to really think about it. Okay, do you think therapy is necessary? Write reflection on, treat yourself as you would get to others. I mean, I can't say that because I'm not like a licensed professional in that way. Like, I'm not a therapist, I'm not a doctor. So I don't think I could ever say that. And I can't say what you need, but I will talk about my own relationship with therapy. And that I recently, in terms of just like the past 3.5 years, I've started going to a therapist. And I think before I would have told you that, I think I didn't think I had coaches, I had like groups that I was involved with. I had a lot of like self-reflective practices and people in my life, but having a one-on-one therapy practice, like, it never felt that important to me until I had my son. And during that time when I had my son, I had a very, before I had him, I had a very successful coaching practice, meaning successful in a very like capitalistic sense, that like I made a lot of money and I was living by myself, and I was doing the self-care work in this cohort form. And then I met my husband, and we got pregnant very quickly. My life changed really, really quickly. And I had my son. And afterwards I started to go back to my work. And I realized that like I couldn't do it anymore. And a couple of levels, I realized I couldn't do it on the level of like the hustle that it required to do that. And then I also realized that like the work was just done. Like it didn't feel right to do it anymore, and I needed something else, but I didn't know what that was. And I saw how much identity I had wrapped up in my work and how much fear I had in kind of like merging my finances in my household with my husband. And I like sat in the bottom of that for like a week. And I was like, I need someone to help me understand this. And I got a therapist, and we're still working together strong 3.5 years later. And we have a really, really, really great relationship. I trust her. And I think that's the thing about therapy that I've heard is most effective, is if you have a strong sense of trust with the therapist. It's about relationship, and it's helped me just an incredible amount to navigate motherhood and to reform my whole business in a way that actually feels much more aligned with who I am and applicable to the stage of my life. So that's what I say. But I think you have to like check in. I think having somebody to guide you is always a really powerful act. One, because there are people out there who've been through it before and they can guide you, and you don't have to figure it all out yourself. And two, I don't think growth and change is possible unless you can become vulnerable. And you need a sense of trust and a relationship where you really trust somebody to do that. And what I mean by vulnerability is like your ability to not know, your ability to feel lost, your ability to talk about things that make you feel uncomfortable, shameful, that you would rather hide. When I look at my first, huge phase of life where I was just trying to be perfect in order to like succeed in my life, I was not vulnerable at all to anyone, including myself. And the more that I am able to be vulnerable in my life, which I have to say, I just don't like still, like, it doesn't feel good to be vulnerable. But I've come to recognize that like, it's a sign of growth, and it's a really important step of growth. So I think what is helpful for self-care is to find a container where you feel like you can have enough trust to be vulnerable and to reflect on like how you're doing in your life, and to get some feedback from someone that you trust on that. So I hope that answers to some degree. Okay, I'm gonna move on to my second point, but thanks for the question, Heather. And then I'll pause after that one too. And that's really the idea that self-care is a journey. And I laugh at that because I still think I'm holding on to this sense that like, I'm going to get there in some way. Like I'm going to figure this out. And I'm kind of really getting to the point now where I see that like, it's not about any kind of achievement at all and self-care. It's rather about being on a journey with myself. I think we have a tendency to look as living in a more capitalist culture of what we can kind of accumulate for ourselves. So it's that sense of self that I'm going to like put it on a resume and show you who I am. And so it feels really countercultural to say like, I'm just going to be here and be curious about myself and want to learn something and want to like keep progressing on that way. And yet it's been the thing that is just, one, helped me in my life so much, but two, I think this is the thing that's going to be like, help us change culture. We live in a culture where it treats us, it's very much a straight line, that like you like you're born into a family, you study to a certain point, you like achieve these like kind of checklist items, and then you're done. I do a lot of reading around childhood development. I have 2 young kids, and I'm really fascinated. People have tracked and studied this super well about like how do children develop. And then I recognize that like there's not a lot out there about how adults develop. And I look at people out there, I look at the clients that I work with, and I see that they are like pots, the plants within a pot that like their roots are so big and trying to grow, and the pot is way too small. Is that they need to be giving themselves space to be growing, to be on a journey. And what I've learned about growth is that it's a cyclical process, is that you start and you go out and you endeavor to do something, you learn something, you feel like you've accomplished something, and then it all falls apart in a way. And it's relative the degree that it falls apart. I think we all go through a few periods in our life where it like falls apart in more dramatic ways. Those are hard times. And they're also, I think, the times that we learn the most about who we are. Talk about being vulnerable is when you think you have this thing around you that keeps you secure, and then it's taken away. I served in the Peace Corps after college, and I like fell in love so hard there. Oh my gosh, like so hard. And I really thought this person was going to be like the person for me. It was so not logical. It was just so heart-centered. And that person wasn't the person for me. And it was a really ugly breakup. And it shattered me. It took me like 2 years to kind of feel like myself again after that. I look back at what what helped me become myself. And it was, I look back at that period to be like, I had to really, really dig down deep and figure out who I was if I was going to like function in my life. And it took a lot of work and in different forms. And that's a whole other workshop probably of how to like survive or break up with self-care. But I look at it and I'm like, I had achieved something. It felt great. And then I lost it. It fell apart. And then I had to go back on the journey again. And I had to learn and learn and learn. And same way with my business, as I was saying, I had like achieved so much of my business in this way that like, I hadn't even been trying that hard to make something. And all of a sudden this like amazing coaching practice came into my life. And then I had to let it all go. And so the more that we can look at cycles in ourselves, the more I think we can start to understand like we're surrounded by cycles all the time. And remember how I said before about Ayurveda, that Ayurveda is the main, most profound teaching of Ayurveda is that we're not even just connected to nature, we are nature. That the same elements that make up nature, I'm not different than an animal. I'm not a machine. I'm not a robot. Like, I don't think that we are robots. That we are part of it, and yet we live in a kind of a time and space where we've convinced ourselves that we can like put on our heat in the winter, get strawberries in the winter. We can architect our whole entire lives, and so we don't have to actually connect to nature itself. And the more, so we talk about like, you know, I think advocacy for climate change is so super important. I think there's so many things that we can do to kind of like policy change, and yet one of the most important things, if we really want to be creating a world where people respect the environment, is that we have to really respect ourselves, because we are that. And I think if we can't have a relationship with ourselves that we understand like the cycles of who we are and how that connects to the cycles outside of us, that we're going to have a really hard time truly loving nature and truly loving ourselves. And I think this is also why when we go into nature and we spend time there, that we feel like buoyed by that and we feel like ourselves. It's because we have that remembrance. It's like the deep down, this is who I am. Heather, I'm seeing you're saying, how do you spell that? It's Ayurveda. It's a big science. People go to school in India for, you know, like becoming doctors in it there. It's a lot that's in there. And yet it's very simple in a lot of ways. It's about finding balance. It's about getting to know who you are. And it's about living your life in rhythm with nature. I had to break it down into 3 parts. And so, you know, what we gain from starting to understand that self-care is a cycle is that we just can keep getting to know ourselves through it. I don't know anyone who's able to like take one self-care practice and just extend it through their whole entire life. That I think that the people that do that, like some people, maybe they are just like very steady, regular people that don't need that. But I know for myself, my life has changed a lot. Like I was a single person for a while, and then I was partnered, and then I had kids, and then I had another kid, and then we're in pandemic quarantine together. And I know that like my self-care, it amounts to peaks and it feels really great. And then there are moments where my routines fall apart. And I can look at that again like I failed. And yet what really I've gained in it is one, self-awareness of just understanding how I work, understanding the cycles, getting to know about myself during those more vulnerable moments of life. And then also it's just a chance for me to keep evolving my self-care with who I am. I think if we're doing this adult development thing, meaning that we're letting ourselves learn and grow with life, that we're gonna, you know, keep needing to have new forms of self-care. I know that what used to feed me like 8 years ago, it doesn't feed me in the same way right now. I want to read different books. I want to move my body in different ways. And so when I help people with routines, and which I'm going to get to in the 3rd part about the methodology of how we actually get there, on habits and routines, it's about recognizing that like it needs to like, you need to have a routine, but you also need to know how to create a routine, because your routine that you have is going to fall apart, and that's not a problem. But you need to have a skill set to know how to keep bringing it back into your experience. So, all right, I'm going to pause again and just see if anyone has any questions, or you can just share a little bit of your own experience too. Check back in with my tea. I'm one of those speakers that I thrive really seeing people. So this, I really appreciate doing these workshops, and it's also hard for me to not be able to see you all. and what you're doing right now and how you're responding to things. So getting a little bit in the chat box is really helpful for me. Okay, I see one from Catherine Nicole. Hi, Catherine. Do you practice meditation? I do practice meditation. I'm seeing, okay, Britt's gonna, okay, but I'm answering it, I get it. I practice meditation. It's taken really, really different forms throughout my life. I for a long time, a very physical yoga practice on my mat of just being able to really move my body in a meditative way. And that became my meditation. And then there was a period where I really was about seated meditation, and I would wake up every morning and I would sit on my cushion and I would attend meditation workshops. And there's a lot in there. I say like if you have the time and space in your life to do a bit of meditation, which as a new parent, I've not quite found that, just admittedly right now, that's not a habit that I'm currently doing a lot with. But if you do have the time and space and you want a self-care habit that will yield a lot, just taking some time to sit with yourself is such a powerful act. And, there's so many different instructions out there for meditation, and there's a lot of schools. People have studied the Vipassana technique a lot. I sat one of the 10-day silent Vipassana retreats kind of during that 2-year breakup period. And that was one of the things I feel like I was like at my bottom before I went into that retreat. And that retreat, I look at it and like everything just started to like get better after that. Like I didn't like dramatically change, but that was the point where I started to like crawl out of the bottom of it. And then I know there are a lot of people, I've never done this, but a lot of people use apps like Headspace or what's the other one? Insight Timer. People like that one a lot. And so whatever it is, like make it work for you to be able to wake up in the morning and do it right when you finish working at nights, before you go to bed, whatever it is that you have a routine with it. Because I think of meditation as one of those skills that like it's like a muscle, and you really have to exercise it pretty often for it to feel good and to feel like you're getting somewhere with it, even though the whole point of meditation is like you don't get anywhere. And that's like the amazing paradox, is that you like build this muscle and you're like, oh, this is really like I'm feeling the ground of this exercise, and then it's just like all it is being in the moment, like you don't accumulate anything from it. And I'll say the last thing, and just in case there are any other parents of young children out there, like my meditation practice absolutely right now is being with my kids all day and staying present with them. And any form of meditation, like your mind will wander, that like you're here in the moment, I'm focusing on my breath, I'm focusing on my kids. And all of a sudden I'm like thinking about what we're having for dinner tonight, or that thing that I did 2 years ago that just popped into my brain. And my practice is about like, I want to be here, and I'm going to come back right now, and I'm going to come back like to my body, to my breath. And so I can be here with my kids. And so some people maybe traditionally wouldn't call that meditation, but I find it like more challenging sometimes than like sitting on a cushion meditation. So I hope that was helpful. Awesome. Okay. So I'm going to move on to the last point that I have here, which is more about methodology. And then I'll take another pause there for see what people have questions. The third part I want to talk about is a shift to make, that it's in self-care that smaller is actually better. We're often taught in a culture that says bigger is better, that if we're going to have a change in our lives, it's going to be like a whole new me. This is the New Year's resolution thing that like, or the Biggest Loser thing. I think you can have different names for it. But the idea that like, I'm gonna like eat the last things I'm ever gonna eat of this kind. I'm gonna do like my last sugar tonight. And then tomorrow I'm gonna wake up and be this way. I'm gonna like wake up tomorrow and I'm gonna be the kind of person that goes to the gym. And this is hard in a few ways. One is that if we look at self-care like a muscle, that we're like, you wouldn't go to a gym and be like, what is like the biggest weight that you have in here? And I have never lifted weights before, but I'm gonna like lift this weight. And then you try to lift it. Maybe you hurt yourself, hopefully not. But I think what happens at the end for a lot of people is they say like, oh, I guess I'm just not good at lifting weights. And when I talked before at the beginning about how people say that they feel like they're bad at self-care, I think that's what I'm talking about, is that we've tried to do something in a way that's not sustainable. It's not really that smart to make a change in that way, to go from a very dramatic way of living and the next day try to live the complete opposite way. That what does work is that we need to have a gradual change where we feel like we're just every day, building new habits and reinforcing those habits with routines, and then reinforcing those routines with like bringing in new habits, where we feel like we're always just kind of learning a little bit more, and we're always we're learning more about ourselves in the process. There's an actual methodology that I'm going to put the name of it in the chat. And it's Kaizen. It's a Japanese word. And what Kaizen means is good change, small change, continuous change. It's a business philosophy, and it was started after World War II as a way to like rebuild after World War II. And it said that if we are going to make these kinds of changes that we need to make right now, we're going to have to go really slowly, and we're going to have to make sure that we're being sustainable on how we're doing things. So we're going to look for the smallest possible changes and tweaks that we can make all the time. We're going to make a culture of that, so everyone's always looking for little changes to make. We're going to reward those changes. It's a big part of Kaizen, I guess, in Japan, that like there's comment boxes, and people within businesses, they can put in to say like, this is the small change that I think we should make. And then people get rewarded. It's like a very small amount of money. Like I think like $30 or something. And so it's like a small change, a small amount of money. Everyone just sort of feels like this is kind of fun. I'll do this. And people have built like, you know, multi-million-dollar companies like this, like Toyota. Like I believe that was one of the ones that was made with Kaizen. And so I like to use it as a personal change methodology too, that we're not trying to wake up tomorrow morning and be the kind of person who goes to the gym every single day. Like we're trying to wake up the next morning and we're trying to like figure out where our shoes are to go for a run. And I say with Kaizen that like, it should be like stupidly small. So like finding your shoes and making sure that they fit, and making sure that your laces tie, and making sure that they're comfortable when you walk around your house, and not even like going for a walk. And then the next day you put your shoes by the door. And then the next day you put your shoes on and you like walk outside for 5 minutes. And you know, you have to know yourself that you're like, if you're already like a pretty good walker, that wouldn't be like a good change for you. That wouldn't be a good Kaizen. Like maybe the Kaizen of that is that like you start to like take another loop around something that feels like a cool place to go, that you feel like you're increasing your mileage in some way. I want to be careful not to conflate Kaizen too much with productivity, because I think that can be where it's taught a lot kind of in business school. As I really see Kaizen is about relationship. It's about understanding that we are never going to be perfect. Rather we're going to be in the constant process of change, and that instead of feeling like it's wrong to not have it all figured out, rather it's beautiful to not have it all figured out, because it means we get to be in the process of change. If we think about in our lives, like what has brought us joy, it's probably feeling like something has changed. Sometimes, of course, some changes are really hard, and I think those changes can have silver linings that can be amazing. But like just a feeling that we are growing with our lives, the feeling that we're progressing at work, that we're like getting a little bit better, the feeling that like, you know, we created like a new system in our house. We do a lot of laundry. We have young kids, and I actually get just so much joy out of learning more about laundry. I've never been someone who's great at laundry, and I do a lot of it now. But just recognizing like, okay, like I just figured out the quick wash cycle, that like we can do a quick wash and it doesn't seem to really get the clothes any less clean than if we do like the long wash. So I'm like, we can do quick wash. And it's a great Kaizen because it like saves water, it saves energy. It seems to get things the same amount done. It saves time. And it's just like this little shift that actually opens up a lot. In terms of like a more self-care perspective, the one I like to offer to people is around where you plug in your phone at night. It is very Kaizen to think about changing where you change the plug. So if you keep it right by your bed, which I'm guessing a lot of us probably do, you would move it across the room, or if you're feeling super brave, you plug your phone in another room at night. And this is a little change, like to actually change where you plug your phone in physically will take you, I don't know, a minute to do that. But the changes that it could yield in terms of like it not being the very last thing that you look at before you go to bed at night, your phone, and not being the very first thing that you look at when you wake up in the morning, and not being the thing that you like automatically reach for if you can't sleep at night. And so it's a small change, but it's one that like you think about like, oh, wow, the amount of things that could make. And then what I like to say too is recognizing that like if you are practicing lots of little habits, it's really helpful to have a routine. And this is what like we're all so busy, we're all so overwhelmed. Life, culture, everything, society is overwhelming. And so to wake up every single morning and try to figure out how to take care of yourself, like, and if you're someone who already like is good at that, that's Well, actually, no. I was going to say, if you're already someone who knows how to like do all the self-care, I'm like, no, that person has a routine. And that's the reason that they're able to do it. We all have routines all the time. I'm gonna say that. It's just a matter if your routines feel like self-care or if they don't. Waking up in the morning and scrolling on Facebook for 15 minutes is a routine. Like if you do it, I think so many routines are around phone stuff these days because it really gets programmed in our brains of just like, this is the automatic thing that I do with my finger and swiping. Muscle memory, dopamine hits, all of that is very real. And so it's looking at like, are the routines that I have in my life ones that actually nourish me? Like, are they ones that give me energy rather than feeling like I'm taking it away? And then to think about the things that do give you energy, be it, you know, getting some exercise, be it taking time to visit with a friend every week, be it being in nature, taking a bath, writing in your journal, meditating, going to therapy, like in terms of what self-care is, like I can't tell you that, like I can give you categories of it, but really it's about you understanding how you thrive in your life and being curious about that. But I will encourage you to go small, to think about small steps, and also to think about how to change those into routines. So I'm a big fan of having a morning routine. I think waking up first thing in the morning and having a self-care routine, it sets the tone for the whole entire day. If you don't do it in the morning, I think it can be really hard to get it other places. I just want to be clear in that like if you look at an Ayurvedic kind of traditional routine that they give you for your day, 2/3 of it's in the morning. They want you to do a lot of stuff in the morning. If you look at a traditional Ayurvedic daily routine, you'll feel intimidated, because I do. But it's more about making sure that you're setting the pace for your day as something in self-care. And I say it's nice in the morning to be able to do something for your body. So I like to drink a cup of warm water every morning. I scrape my tongue and kind of like wash my face, do some like rose water spray. I drink a cup of warm water, and that's like a really nice thing for my body. I do a little stretching sometimes too, just like these funny stretches in my kitchen. It's nice to do something for your mind too, to be able to, or your spirit, however you look at it. So like to do a little bit of meditation, to read something that feels uplifting for you. Again, I'm sort of in the mothering phase of things, so a lot of my time is just hanging out with my kids. But just about like for me, that morning, the moment in the morning with my coffee and sitting there with my kids and just like being present, like that is how I feel fed, and that's my mindfulness practice. So to have something for your body, something for your mindfulness is good. I think something for your home is kind of nice too. I'm a big fan of making the bed, and that's like just built into my routine. And what happens if you have a routine is that you wake up in the morning and you don't, even if you're feeling kind of bad about yourself that day, even if the world feels like it's, you know, it's a very scary place. Even if you had a bad night the night before, like lots of things, like you still just have the momentum going for you to be like, okay, I guess what I do is I pour my warm water right now and I make my bed and I like sit and read this book that I always read every morning. And my guess is if you're not feeling great when you wake up, if you do those things, like you'll be feeling a little better. At least it will give you a little bit more momentum to take more actions that feel like self-care throughout the day. But it's really hard if you don't have it practiced and you don't have it as a routine. And I want to be really careful when I talk about all of this too, because I think we kind of live our lives with a perfectionistic filter. Many of us do, that we say like, am I doing that well enough? And if I'm not, like, that's a bad thing. And so just to not get too perfectionistic about any of it, like, again, I'm a big believer in 70-30, that you have 70% of the time, it's really great to do a routine that feels like self-care, that gives you energy back. And then 30% of the time, you know, you like have that day, you know, I used to say you go to the party, you have another drink, whatever it is, but like now we're in quarantine. So I don't know what it is for you, but to just make sure that you're giving yourself enough flexibility in your life, and then a lot of grace when things don't go the way that you like hope that they would. And just to remember that you can start over the next day, to choose a really small habit, stupidly small, to get excited about it, to feel, I think the reward I give myself is just excitement. I'm just like, I'm doing this. Like I'm better at laundry than I was. I'm so much better at laundry than I was a year ago. I like got the stain spray, really had to learn a lot, and I feel really proud of that and excited about it. So happy to share that with you all here. I'm seeing from Britt, she says, there's a fantastic book I recently read called How to Do Nothing, The Attention Economy. It talks about self-care and social media. It's fascinating. I read that book. I really loved it. And it's interesting because Yes, I'm remembering the part about the social media. Yes, this is actually one of my favorite parts of that whole book, was about context collapse. And this is what helped me to stop scrolling on my Facebook feeds, was reading about this. Thanks for bringing this in, Britt, because this is really big. Because I was feeling a bit like a monster, that I would just scroll through my feed and I would see, and I felt like I would just go numb as soon as I would go on there. And I would see, some people post their parents die. People post, like the ads pop up for like people who are struggling in other countries. Like, it's a lot that's on there. And I would just feel like I would go numb, and I would kind of like not know what to do. And I would feel a little panicked. And she talks about in the book, Jenny Odell, I think is the writer's name. She talks about this idea of context collapse, is that we can't see, like, my friend's dog just died, and this is my other friend's birthday party, and this is my teacher's vacation property, and this is like an ad for like refugees here. It's that all of these different things that hit all of our different brains, and we put them all in one space, there's no context for them anymore. And that's what social media is. It's just sort of like a container, and there's no context for having a conversation about real grief, for really being able to just like be at a birthday party and get excited. And that getting all of those in such quick succession, it leads to a collapse where we feel like we can't really handle it. And when I read that, I was like, that is exactly the experience I have on social media. And that's why I'm not going to scroll anymore. So thanks for bringing that in. And that whole book, I'll say it's a little bit of a dense read. I'm curious what you thought of it, Britt. But I learned a lot too. She's really brilliant. Okay, Catherine is asking, I'm going to answer these questions here. Catherine Nicole is asking, do you line up with your self-care routine with your husband's, or is it more symbiotic? It's a good question, because I think that is a part of it when we're living with people. I think we both have had to make changes. As I said, we kind of had a quick start to our relationship. Just in full disclosure, we've been dating for a couple of months. We'd known each other in the past, but we've been dating, and we got accidentally pregnant with our son. And we just decided that we were going to go all in, and like, we were in our mid-30s, like, let's just have a baby together. And I'm really glad we did, because we're married now, and we've been together for 4.5 years, and it's been great. And it was a lot of change all at once, of us just moving our lives in together. I think we tend to go to bed around the same time. That's like a nice thing. He stays up a little later, and he reads on his phone in bed. Like, I like to be in bed by 10. We have a little routine with each other where we just talk about, our days a little bit and what we appreciate about each other. It's kind of cheesy, and we find that we fight a lot more if we don't do it. So just taking a little time to consciously appreciate each other at night is helpful. And then in the morning, like, he will definitely want to sleep in later than I do. And I really, really treasure the time where I can just get up and have my morning routine. I try to get up before my kids do, so I can just have, like, even if it's just 15, 20 minutes to drink my hot water and do my stretches. And then, and then we have, we have weekly routines, and that's been an important part of my self-care as well, that I talk a lot about daily routines, but we have nice weekly routines around just having Friday and Saturday nights just be for us. And I mean, there's no context for that now because we're all in quarantine, but before, just making sure that we weren't making a lot of weekend plans, especially Friday nights. We've always kind of held those as sacred, that's time where we just like watch our TV show and eat dessert and just, hang out with each other. So I think it's taken some flex and flow as we both are changing. He's changed jobs once, and that was like, he used to work from home more with his old job, and he didn't, and now he's home all the time. So that required a bit of a change. But I think it just takes us really being honest and clear about what we want and communicating around that. Again, I'm doing a workshop just around self-care and parenting in March, and I can get more into dynamics. I think one of the things that has felt hard is around how we split up stuff around childcare, me being the mother and him being the father, and how some of that stuff does fall along gender lines. So I can talk more about that in the workshop in March if anyone is a parent out there and wants to hear that. Catherine Nicole saying, social media comment, I am more than halfway through a 30-day social media fast, and it's been really centering focus. Totally agree with what you said about scrolling. I think it's so important. I really do. I'm really focusing on this in my life right now. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, I've deleted a lot of apps off my phone, and I tried turning my phone to grayscale. I'll say this, that that didn't work for me. I didn't like looking at my world in gray. I really like photographs in color. So it was interesting that I've been experimenting with different habits about how to be less focused on media, and I've found some really work, like deleting the Gmail app from my phone has been amazing. It saved me so much time. And I'm actually way better at emailing when I just sit down and focus on my computer. And then certain ones don't work. Like I like having color photographs. So let's see. Jessica says, I feel guilty practicing self-care right now when so many people are hurting. It seems selfish. What's a better way for me to think about this? Well, I think it's just really how we look at self-care. Like if self-care is like I'm trying to think of some form of like totally decadent like thing where you're just desensitized to the whole world around you. But I think about what self-care is, and it can be decadent in moments. I think like a little decadence is good for us all. But really what I understand as self-care is that it helps us become more sensitive. Is that a lot of what we do when we're just like on social media, like kind of engaged in compulsive behaviors, is that we're numbing ourselves, that we're engaging in a whole life so we don't have to actually feel what's going on with ourselves. And we're not sensitive to ourselves. And if we're not sensitive to ourselves, we're not really sensitive to others. We might be sort of like codependently like fixated on others, but we're not really sensitive to who they are. And so I think you can tell your self-care is working if you feel like you kind of understand yourself more, you're more compassionate with yourself, you are more curious about yourself. And what I have found is if you go into that place, there's a very, very direct line where that takes you into actually not only caring more about other people, but feeling very motivated to want to change. And that was the last part I wanted to talk about, are the connections between social justice and self-care. So I hope I'm gonna go right into that and hope that that helps as well. As when I started teaching around self-care and teaching yoga, it was when I think recently, what I'll say is recently we've had a much bigger nationwide cultural conversation around social justice, around what that means, especially this summer. It's been a really important thing I think about this last year and any good that's come of it. And it's that we've had a much broader conversation around social justice and who is served by our current society and culture and who is not, and who has access to be able to take care of themselves and who does not. But when I first started doing this, it wasn't even on my radar. As you can see, like a white woman. I grew up in the suburbs of Washington, D.C. I never really thought too much about what other people were going through in any kind of real way. And when I started to practice self-care in a really embodied way, I started to understand more about the world, and I started to become like I wanted to hear other people's stories. I understood more of what I had and the privilege that I had, and I wanted to use that. And I've taught hundreds of women self-care through the programs that I teach. And pretty much across the board, everyone says that when you do this, all of a sudden you start to really want to help. It's like when we are exposed to this energy of self-care and we feel how important it is to be able to take time for ourselves, be nurturing for ourselves, we want that for other people around us as well. And I think if we want to be in a social justice practice, if we want to be advocating, we have to make sure that it's sustainable. We have to make sure that our health is good. We have to make sure that our mental health is good. I think we really need to look at codependence. A lot of people who are very, very drawn to social justice, like organizing and practice, I think there's a lot of codependence that needs to be looked at in there. But we feel that we have to deny ourselves in order to serve somebody else. And I find that codependence, it always kind of collapses at a certain point. It's not a sustainable way to be in relationship. It's not where creativity comes from. It's not where true joy comes from. And when I think about a social justice practice that is going to be one that really does revolutionize our world, so we're able to create care for all people in a really embodied way, it's that it has to be one that's based on like joy that we spark with each other. And we have to feel that joy inside of ourselves first. It has to be a creative practice. It has to be one where people feel like they have a stake in it and that they're going to learn and grow. And people have to know that it's okay to change. I talked about vulnerability before and how important that is for the change process. And I look at most people out there in the world and how kind of like dug in their heels are, and this is my identity and this is who I am. And this is not about politics, because I see this very strongly on both sides of the spectrum. And to realize what the possibilities are for us to start to realize that we can be vulnerable, we can change, we can grow. And as I said before, that if we are modeling that for other people, that is how people learn, is if we're willing to be part, like to change and grow and be going through a cycle and be honest about it and be tender with ourselves, that people will start to pay attention to that. And I think of my own life as being an example, and this is not to make me into like, again, I'm still learning about self-care with everyone else, but it was me deciding I want to invest in myself. I want to do this self-care thing. I'm going to like make this lead the way. And that was, 7 years ago. And I think about, I've worked with hundreds of people to talk about self-care, and I've heard the ripple effects of how that's helped the people around them. And that was me just taking an interest in my own self-care, not even trying to start a business about it in the beginning. So if you think like, what's the good, like I'm hurting somebody with this, I would say that like, maybe you could think about how you could really help people with it. But again, self-care, it's not about escapism. It's not about like pretending, like feeling good at all costs. It's really about learning how to be sensitive to yourself, learning how to stay grounded and stabilized in your own nervous system, and then understanding how to model that and extend that as kindness to people around you. So that was all I have. I stayed pretty close to the hour this time, but and I'll stay on another moment. If anyone has any comments or questions they want to share, you can put them in the chat box or in the Q&A. And I'll also just tell you, if you are interested in my work, you can look at my website here, selfcarewithgracy.com. And yes, thank you, here. And I didn't bring it with me tonight. It's like upstairs in my house, but I wrote a book 2 years ago. It's called Self Carefully. You can buy it on Amazon, or if you like, you can buy it on Bookshop. I really am a big fan of Bookshop these days. And it's a book about caring for yourself. And it does have a lot of connections in there between social justice and self-care, and has a lot in there about Ayurveda as well. It's a beautifully illustrated book. A dear friend of mine did the art for it, and it's stunning. It's a hand printed book. It's very special. And we're in our last run of it right now. So if you do want to get a copy, I would suggest getting it as well. And I'm always happy to hear from you. So if you want to reach out and just tell me anything about the workshop that resonated, or just stay in touch. I have a newsletter. If you go to my website, you can sign up. I'm doing it like every 3 weeks now. I used to do it weekly. I have a podcast. It's called Self Care with Gracie. I'm just putting episodes out there again, but I have a big backlog over the years. And I'm not super active on social media these days, but you can find me on Instagram as well. I think that's all. Yes, thanks, Heather. I appreciate all your questions and comments, and I thank everyone so much for sharing their ideas and questions.
Some people are saying that they're not being able to see the chat. I don't know how. There should be a little, I'm not sure how it looks like on your screen, but there should be like a little speech bubble on that. Or if you go into Windows, you should be able to see that. If not, let me know what information that you need. I have my the website on here, but also in about an hour. Oh, interesting.
Oh, interesting. Oh, really? It's interesting.
Okay, so it's only to panelists only. All right, maybe that's a new feature that they set up. So can see the chat, just not posted. Okay, good to know. All right, well, everything's been recorded, and if you all have any other questions, feel free to reach out to Gracie or myself. We are happy to talk, and let me find out what date that is in March for the parenting self-care.
Yeah,
It is
the 21st.
March 11th.
March 11th. I was wrong. Cool. Yeah, I'm really excited about that one. I've learned a lot over this past year around sustainable parenting, and a lot of joy. I feel like I really have a lot of like joy I want to share in that, and ways to like access more joy in your parenting as well. So please spread the word, because I think a lot of people probably need some parenting self-care right now as well.
Awesome. Any last questions or comments?
Well, thank you all so much.
All right. Thank you all for taking your time and supporting library programs. And thank you so much, Gracie, for always your wealth of information. It's always a delight having you. So
Aw, thanks. It's really great. I'm so excited for number 5 to come in
I
March.
know.
Thank you for having me.
I
It's
feel like I need to give you like a digital sticker or something. Be like, thanks for doing so many library programs. You're awesome.
yeah. I love a reward like that. Just a simple one.
Send like a sheet of stickers or something.
I'll take.
A bookmark. There we go. Awesome. Well, thank you all so much. We appreciate it. And this will be uploaded shortly to the YouTube channel.
Awesome. Thanks everyone. Have a good night. Bye bye.